I've been putting this story off for a long time. Strange as it may seem, I didn't know where to begin. Perhaps it was the fear of talking about the feelings that came over me when I started to live again. But that night I realized it was time. In the kitchen, in the bright light of the table lamp, I was washing the dishes after a modest dinner, when in the silence came the sound of a key in the door, a sound that made my heart beat faster. Alvin, my oldest son, had come home. I wasn't expecting him, for his studies in engineering took up most of his time, and I didn't think he could come so suddenly. As I contemplated his arrival, I felt an old, almost forgotten joy come alive in my chest. The moment he walked in, it was as if the sun had shone in the kitchen with his appearance. Alvin was already a man, tall and confident. He had that same fire in his eyes that I'd always loved, but now he was more mature, ready to take responsibility. I looked at him and remembered how I had once held him in my arms, and now he was a grown-up, strong man. Suddenly a strange excitement swept over me. "Mom, I missed you," he said, and his words melted away the long months of loneliness. Our embrace was real, full of warmth and love. I was 47, and I often felt groomed and devastated. The years had not spared me, and even though I had put my youth behind me, I still felt that energy in me, used for something more than just a drawn-out household. As we talked about his business and plans, I noticed that my youngest son, Tom, had pulled up to the conversation. With him, we discussed his upcoming exams, and over the conversation I felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. All these years I had tried to be the perfect mother to both of them, but coming back to reality, anything as normal as a cozy conversation revived something in my soul. But at the same time, I couldn't help but notice how I myself silently missed the life that was left behind. Every day passed in routine, cares, worries, taking care of the children, and while they were growing up, I felt myself gradually sinking into darkness. And so, as I went to bed, thoughts began to swirl in my head. There was no longer the whoosh of the period of passion and youth around me, but suddenly I realized insistently that there was still alive in me the woman who wanted to love and be loved. That evening when Alvin returned, I felt something warm and long ago awaken within me. The next morning I stepped out into the garden, which filled the air with the sweet scent of flowers, and I felt the spark in my heart ignite again. It was a fresh start, the beginning of a new page in my life. But what would happen next? Would we be able to turn a new chapter together, leaving the shadows of the past behind us? And yet, with a new feeling, I realized that, looking back, I was ready to take the next step. This thought never left me. Life is full of surprises, and perhaps happiness was about to be at our doorstep. I longed not only for a new beginning for myself, but also for my oldest son to help me see the world from a different perspective. My heart was filled with hope, and I was willing to take a chance, to stumble into the same unfamiliar ground I needed to learn to live in again. And despite the uncertainty, I knew I had lost nothing. The lust for life was burning in me again, ready for new adventures. Alvin stayed for a few days, and during that time, the house was filled with laughter and joy. I tried to catch every moment, as if I were afraid of missing this brief happiness. We sat around the table and talked about his life, what he had learned, his friends, and future plans. I was proud of him, watching what a wonderful man he had become, strong, smart, and yet with a kind heart. But the more we talked, the more fears blossomed in my heart. I thought more and more about how this was temporary, about how he would leave again, and how I would feel empty again. The loneliness that lurked in the corners of my house like a ghost threatened to come over me again if he left me. One evening, as Alvin and I sat on the couch looking through old photo albums, I couldn't resist asking, "Will you ever think about coming home after your studies? After you graduate, I mean?" I tried to speak calmly, but my voice treacherously shook. He looked at me, and I could see him pondering. "It depends on what life has to offer me, Mom. I want you to be proud of me and what I will accomplish," he said, and his words were full of dreams and aspiration. I shook my head. "But I need to be with you. I want you closer. I miss you every day, Alvin. You don't realize how lonely I feel when you're gone," I admitted, not trying to hide the tears that rolled down my cheeks. Alvin pulled me against him and said, "Mom, I know how hard this is, but it's your life and you deserve to be happy. We can find a way to be closer, even when I'm studying." His words were full of love, but there was still an anxiety inside me that suppressed all my hope. Meanwhile, Tom, who was watching us with interest, asked a question that caught me off guard. "Why don't you start doing something for yourself, Mom? Why not do something that will make you happy?" Those words pierced me. How could I forget about myself on the scale, consumed with taking care of my children? I had always been a mother, sacrificing my happiness for them. I quickly replied, "But I'm happy when I'm preoccupied with you." Tom smiled, but his eyes were full of understanding. "You have to remember that you are a woman, not just a mother. You deserve joy and a life full of accomplishment," he said confidently. This simple truth suddenly seemed so profound. In that moment, something clicked in my brain. I realized that I had to get busy with myself, lest I end up as a princess in a castle made of loneliness. I wanted my sons to be proud not only of their education, but also of the kind of person their mother had become. I couldn't miss the opportunity to relive my life of pleasure and passion again. Alvin reached out his arm and placed it on my shoulders. "Mom, let's go together. We can support each other, and I can help you discover new horizons," he said, and in that moment I realized that he was ready not only to return, but to be my ally in this new life. That night I experienced the realization that my son was not just a young man, but my friend, ready to open doors closed by trauma and loneliness together. We would make plans, dream, and build something new. Once beside him, I felt the clouds begin to part. Together we can overcome any obstacle. With each day that Alvin was home, I tried to take steps to change my life. I decided to start blogging about being a mom and keeping myself in the world. It allowed me to combine my love for my children and my desire to be myself. It has been so good for me to see Alvin supporting me by taking notes for my blog. He taught me some technical things and was excited about my ideas. I felt exuberant to have rediscovered that light for myself again. That night as I was getting ready for bed, putting on my lace pajamas, I felt incredibly happy. Everyone was home, and it filled me with warmth. I lay in bed looking up at the ceiling with thoughts of how long I had dreamed of such an evening family idyll. The sounds of laughter and conversations came from the living room from afar, creating a homely atmosphere. I felt the spark of life in my heart rekindling. But suddenly there was a quiet knock on the door. Strange, at this late hour. I got out of bed in surprise and walked to the door, my heart pounding in anticipation. When I opened it, Alvin was standing in front of me. There was that light in his eyes that made me hold my breath. "Mom, can I come in?" he asked, slightly embarrassed, like the boy I remembered from when he was little. I nodded, and he cautiously stepped into the room. In the darkness, lit only by the soft light of the desk lamp, he looked strikingly good. I felt my cheeks flush with excitement. The moment was filled with something magical, indistinct, as if some invisible stream of energy had enveloped us. "I couldn't sleep," he said, and there was a melody of slight uncertainty in his voice. "Thought about how good we had it tonight. It makes me so happy to see you happy." Those words fluttered in my heart. We were still in search of a new beginning, and his support meant more to me than I could express. I moved closer, and he sat on the edge of the bed. Our closeness seemed dangerous yet exhilarating at the same time. As I looked up at him, I felt a warmth that enveloped me like a blanket on a cold night. I decided to open my soul and tell him better about what I was experiencing. "You corrected me when you remembered that I was a woman, not just a mom. That will be remembered for a lifetime, Alvin. Not just because I missed you, but because I can be me now," I confessed, looking deep into his eyes. I was bitter and sweet at the same time. This moment was so close that it was easy to trip over the edge. He leaned closer. I could feel his breath. "I'll always be there for you, you know that." "Mom, you deserve everything life has to offer," he whispered, and his tone was so delicate that I couldn't help but stiffen at his sincerity. In that instant, as if time stood still, I crouched next to him, taking a step toward him. Our connection was stronger than I could have ever imagined. For a moment, I felt young, alive, full of life, and it was beautiful. The spark between us grew stronger with every moment, and I couldn't resist the feeling. "Alvin, you know how much I love you, don't you?" I said, and there was a note of awe in my voice. He nodded, and then boldly held out his hand to me. "I know you do, Mom. I love you too, and it's very important to me that you're happy," he replied, trying to avoid words that might sound too bold. We sat there, and in that emotion-filled silence, I felt a rush of desire come over me again. It wasn't just the love of a mother for her son, it was more than that, perhaps a realization that there is room in all of us for deep feelings and affections that transcend boundaries. I decided it was time to open up further. "Tell me, how do you feel about making sure this house stays filled with laughter and joy forever?" I asked, taking refuge in his eyes. Those words, spoken hopefully, were imbued with a desire to keep that bright atmosphere in our home. Alvin smiled, and his expression became mingled with something new: joy, light, awe. He leaned even closer, and our faces were a few centimeters apart. Every heartbeat sounded in unison. "Let's do this together, Mom. The path to happiness starts with being open to new changes," he said in a quiet, deep voice. I felt a sweet excitement stirring in my chest. This wasn't just a conversation, this was a moment that would stay with us forever. Suddenly, I caught a spark filling the atmosphere. I felt the desire grow and how I wanted to share with him not only the love, but also the feelings I had been hiding for so long. In that moment, everything fell into place. I was not afraid of the future. I knew that we could walk this path together, filling my life with new colors and sounds. That night, as we sat together, everything around us seemed magical. I realized that despite my fears and loneliness, we could create something special together, something alive and bright, full of warmth and tenderness. As I sat next to Alvin, I felt the space between us fill with something magical. His breath was light and warm, like a gentle breeze running over my skin. I noticed how the light from the lamp fell softly on his face, emphasizing the fine lines of his features, making them even more expressive. His eyes shone with a deep luster, full of tenderness and understanding. I leaned toward him, and our lips were close together, as if an invisible thread drew us to each other. In that silence, full of playful anticipation, I felt his hand on my cheek. His slender fingers gently touched my skin, sending a shiver through me like an electric pulse. When he leaned closer, our lips almost touched, and I realized how much I missed that close contact, a warmth that enveloped not only my body, but my soul as well. It wasn't just tenderness, it was a promise, a reminder of how good human bonds are, that connect hearts like strings on a harp that create the music of love. We froze in that moment, and it was as if time had stopped. I felt his hand sliding smoothly over my shoulder, embracing and guarding me. The light played on our skin, creating shadows and lights, as if the world itself was watching this magic that was happening between us. "Just be close," I whispered, and there was a spark in his gaze that responded to my words like the tiniest star flaring in a dark sky. In that closeness, in that touch, I realized that not only would our home be filled with light, love would shine in it, ready to bloom into the distant future. We were like two streams of a river merging into one, pushing each other into new sensations, infiltrating a realm of feelings that were just beginning to unfold. At that moment, a new chapter was born in our heart, full of warmth and tenderness, ready to tell its amazing story.